Good afternoon, welcome. You're tuned into the Labor Forum here at WRFG 89.3 FM. And welcome on this very sunny, but still very breezy and kind of a chilly night last night, that's for sure. We hope that we provide a lot of information for you today. Keep your antenna on to hear the great guests that we have on the program today. So my name is Diane Mathewitz, and I'm a retired auto worker, and joined in the studio by Paul McLennan, who's the co-host and a member of Transit Workers Union 732. He was a MARTA worker and also retired. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Diane.
It's another Monday, and we're back in the studio here, ready to provide great information about workers' rights and the struggles of working and poor people, not just in Atlanta and the state of Georgia, this country, but around the world. And we have three great guests, so we hope you'll stay tuned. The opinions that are expressed on the Labor Forum, though, may not necessarily be those of the Board of Directors, staff, or volunteers here at WRFG. But as we always say, right after we say that this program totally fulfills the mission of this station. We are a mission-driven station, and that means that we are dedicated really to providing both information from marginalized groups, people that don't have the money to get on big business media and whose interests aren't expressed by those forces that are trying to exploit and oppress us. And we also do a really good job of bringing grassroots and entertainment folks who are not commercially driven to perform their music. And so we encourage you to listen 24/7 to WRFG, because you're always going to find something interesting on our airwaves. We'll start today, Monday, March 21st, with our labor headlines. You know what, one of the things we do about the labor headlines is we really try to tell you stories that are really impactful, but that you're just not going to see in the pages of the Constitution or on any of the local networks or the major national networks. So, on March 9th, hundreds of thousands of French workers and students filled the streets of some 200 cities in France. The images from Paris alone show a massive crowd with the Eiffel Tower in the background. The issue is changes to France's labor law, which applies to all workers in the country. Currently, almost without exception, French workers have, now hear this, 5 weeks of vacation, plus holidays, health coverage, unemployment compensation, and retirement and pension benefits. Now, these are not the things that are in a union contract. A union contract describes and provides for wages and working hours and conditions. This is something that every French worker has as their right. Now, these changes that are being proposed by the government would eliminate job protections, expand the ability of bosses to fire or lay off workers, and extend the work week beyond the current standard of 35 hours without overtime pay. The ranks of workers were joined by large numbers of students. Especially noticeable was the participation of high school youth. Their militant response to the proposed rollback of long-established and fought-for rights and benefits illustrates both the anger and resistance of young people to the kind of future they face under a declining capitalist system. On the same day, railroad workers on both long-distance and regional lines went on strike over proposed changes in their working conditions. The government of President Francois Hollande is called socialist, but that is in name only, because it is aiding in the attacks on the French working class at the bidding of the bosses and bankers. In addition, Hollande is an active partner with the U.S. in carrying out imperialist war in the Middle East and Africa. Keep in mind that these massive protests were carried out under the martial law that has been put in place since the Paris attacks, which greatly inhibit rights of assembly and free speech. Turning now to national labor news, some 2,200 members of the Steelworkers Union, employed by Allegheny Technologies, Inc., or ATI, fought a company lockout for almost 7 months, from August 15, 2015 until March 2016. Long before the contract negotiations began in the spring of 2015, ATI began preparations for a union-busting lockout, contracting with scabs to take over the union members' work and hiring guards to physically intimidate the workers. The company held captive meetings designed to threaten them and create divisions with false information, all with the goal of creating an attitude of defeat and acceptance among the workers of whatever the company offered. When the bargaining sessions actually began, ATI listed 146 concessions, including drastic increases in the healthcare costs, disastrous work and schedule changes, the creation of a two-tier benefit system, retiree cutbacks, and the elimination of job security provisions. Most of these were contained in their what's called last best and final offer. When the bargaining team said they had to consult with the membership before proceeding with the sessions, ATI locked out the workers at their 12 plants in 6 states. The steel workers filed unfair labor practices charges with the National Labor Relations Board. On February 22nd, it ruled against ATI and declared the lockout illegal in the most emphatic terms. The ruling set a date for a judicial hearing where, if ATI had been found guilty again, it would have faced paying millions of dollars in back pay. So instead, ATI settled a new 4-year contract that contains little of the 146 concessions originally demanded by the company. In a number of areas, the agreement strengthens or increases benefits and rights. The unity of the workers, along with community and union support, led them to prevail during the fall and winter months of picketing during what we know was last year's brutal weather. The Labor Forum extends our solidarity to the steelworkers who fought for their jobs, their union, and their communities. And the last little bit of news is very shortly today at 5 o'clock, a rally in Durham, North Carolina will be held to support the Duke faculty who voted to form a union with SEIU Faculty Forward. These non-tenured professors and teaching assistants make up the majority of staff at today's universities and colleges. Extremely low paid and with no job security or benefits, they are among the millions of poverty wage workers fighting back and joining unions. The Labor Forum has spoken with professors teaching at Atlanta area universities who are similarly engaged in organizing to better their own working conditions, but also are fighting for quality education for their students. We share this information about the Duke non-tenured faculty's victory to bring encouragement to the struggle here in Georgia. Those are the labor headlines for today. We'll move right into Paul's This Week in Labor History.
Thanks, Diane. 2 weeks ago, we reported on the assassination on March 3rd of Berta Caceres, the General Coordinator of the National Council of Indigenous and Popular Organizations of Honduras, or COPIN. Berta was one of the leading indigenous human rights activists in the country. She spent her life fighting in defense of the indigenous rights of the Lenca people, particularly to prevent the privatization of land and natural resources. Less than 2 weeks later, on March 15th, another member of Berta's organization, Nelson Garcia, was murdered after a violent eviction carried out by Honduran security forces in a Lenca indigenous community. The family of Berta Caceres believes that U.S. military aid has fueled repression and violence in Honduras. This aid has led to the creation of special forces who are responsible for the attacks on the social movements. Patriarchal violence has intensified since the 2009 coup, which overthrew the elected Honduran government of Manuel Zelaya. The Obama administration and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton were directly implicated in the coup. Despite the fact that the U.S. role is documented in Clinton's memoir and her released emails, the Clinton campaign has dismissed any demands for accountability as simply nonsense. The success of the overthrow of the Zelaya government led to Honduras being put up for sale to transnational capital. Hundreds of concessions have been given for hydroelectric exploitation and for mining. Resistance has been met with dislocation of indigenous communities, death threats, torture, and assassinations. But 2009 is not the first year the United States has interfered in the internal affairs of Honduras. This brings us to this date this week in labor history, March 21st, 1907, when U.S. Marines landed in Honduras to protect the economic interests of U.S. banana plantations, banks, and railroads. In fact, intervention in Honduras is hardly new. U.S. troops invaded in 1903, 1907, 1911, 1912, 1919, 1924, and 1925. In the 1980s, Honduras was also used by the United States as a staging area for Contra troops opposed to the Nicaraguan government. The history of interventions begins when bananas emerged as an export. After the 1870s, shipping companies began bringing the crop here. In 1889, the founders of what would become the Standard Fruit and Steamship Company, later known as Standard Fruit Company and then as Dole, shipped their first boatload of bananas from Honduras to New Orleans. The fruit found a ready market and the trade grew rapidly. By 1902, local railroad lines were being constructed on the Caribbean coast to accommodate the expanding banana production. The economic dominance and political influence of these companies was so great from the late 19th until the mid-20th century that Honduras became the original model for the banana republic. The development of the banana industry contributed to the beginnings of organized labor movements in Honduras and the first major strikes in the nation's history. The first of these occurred in 1917 against the Cuyamel Fruit Company. The strike was suppressed by the Honduran military, but the following year, additional labor disturbances occurred at the Standard Fruit Company's holdings. In 1922, a general strike hit the Caribbean coast. In response, the United States warship was dispatched to the area, and the Honduran government began arresting leaders. Repression by the Honduran government continues to this day. Another consequence of the violence resulting from the coup in 2009 is the recent increase in refugees leaving the country, many of whom are children. Honduras currently has the highest murder rate in the world. Refugees are coming here to flee militarized violence and to seek political asylum. As we have seen in recent months, deportations of these children, as well as adults, continue under the Obama administration. The responsibility for this crisis lies in the policies which have caused it. It is the decades-long U.S. intervention in the internal affairs of Honduras and other countries around the world that have led to what we are facing today. For children of the world to live in peace, we have to address the root cause, the policies of the United States, the country which Dr. King called in a 1967 speech about the Vietnam War the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today.
Thank you so much, Paul. And that really leads us very well into our interview, which we're going to have in a few minutes. I think we're going to go ahead and take a little short break, and please do listen to this message. When we come back, we're going to be speaking with Eva Cardenas, who is a community organizer with GLAR, and that stands for Georgia Latino Alliance for Human Rights. And we're so happy she's here, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the Labor Forum. Again, you are tuned in to WRFG 89.3 FM. I do want to remind you that there are many ways that you can stay in touch with the Labor Forum, including for those of you who are watching right now on the YouTube channel, you'll see that Eva Cardenas is sitting between Paul and I. She's waving. Hi. and then later we'll have Gloria Slaughter and Susan McQuethy on to talk about the Opportunity School District. It's such a phony name, I hate to even say it. And that'll be our program for today. We also do have our own website at WRFGLaborForum.org. We have a Twitter. We have, what else do we have? Facebook. How could I forget? We have all these kinds of ways for you to communicate with us and for us to communicate with you, so please do take advantage of that. I do want to remind you that we are going to have our spring pledge drive starting April 4th, going through the 24th. We do look forward to you contributing to the station, helping keeping this program and all the other programs on air. Now we will turn real quick to Eva Cardenas, who's seated between Paul and I. And it's so great to see you again.
Thank you for having me.
So Eva is, I said, is a community organizer with GLAR, Georgia Latino Alliance for Human Rights, which in my 40 years here in the Atlanta area doing organizing work is one of the most extraordinary, grassroots, terrific, creative groups that I've ever had the privilege of working with. And Eva is one of those staff people that really helps keep everything going. So we invited her today because there is an event coming up this week. We wanted to both talk about it, but we also really wanted to talk about the reasons for it.
That's right.
So Eva, tell us, the Georgia legislature, you know, every program, every Monday, we just sigh here.
Yeah.
With what are they going to come up next to oppress, to make outrageous laws. So let's start with what Georgia has done in regard to the rights and just the human rights of immigrants in this state.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, I think we share that same sentiment of sort of frustration around the legislation. I do think that the state has shown time and time again throughout the last years and even before then that the main purpose is to create an environment of hostility against anyone that is brown or of immigrant descent. And so what we've noticed again in this legislative session is that they're pushing big on restraining the ability of transportation for folks that have DACA or the executive order by the President Obama that was issued 2 years ago. And essentially what it would do is it would deny students or youth that have those permits to get an actual license, and rather they would have a permit that reads illegal alien. So even that wording in itself provides a sense of what they're trying to do, and that is to create a level of hostility for our community. And it's really problematic in the sense that, you know, it's we're living in very tumultuous times when we have people spewing hate and you know, sort of pushing violence against others that aren't like you or don't look like you or don't respond the same way that you do. And so for people to continue to live under this environment without a direct response is why we're sort of having, part of the reason why we're having the rally, and that is to kind of inform people that we do have rights, and ultimately we understand that this is a long struggle and this is a long fight, but nevertheless we're still standing and we're still here, even after years and decades of legislation that has attempted to sort of smother that growth from our community. We're still resistant and we're still fighting.
I'll just make a comment about one thing. I think it was just last week, there was the 7th anniversary of the death of an immigrant man held at Stewart Detention Center, and there was an event that was held at the ICE, which stands for Immigration and Customs Enforcement Office, which is on what was Spring Street and is now Ted Turner Drive. So there's this combination of so many different things. There's all the kind of checkpoints that take place. There's the petty harassment. There's the actual raids that take place in workplaces and homes. Then people detained and then deported, literally dropped across the border of whatever country with nothing. Could you talk about, though, what the response has been through GLAR and how you're organizing and how you have helped people to know their rights?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's important for folks who are listening to kind of understand that whenever we talk about immigration-related issues, it's very complex because, as you mentioned, Diane, we have sort of the nonprofit sector, the for-profit sector of detention and incarceration that you know, it's continued to profit of black and brown bodies by incarcerating and creating these legislations. And so you also have sort of the legislation part of it that is sort of funneling and creating this door for immigration to continue to fill these quotas in order to make money. And so I think for us it's important to understand sort of how the system has been set up against our communities to kind of defend in different sectors. So obviously with the raids that have happened since the beginning of this year, we've sort of understood how immigration has continued to work by using this new public safety comment, right? The whole notion of we're deporting felons, not families, when in reality you have immigration now showing up at people's doors, sometimes even waiting at parking lots until people step out of their vehicles or their homes to be arrested. And so for us, it's sort of important to understand how immigration is working, how the different legislations in the state are helping funnel our people into a for-profit business. And so for us, it's sort of allowing our folks to understand that it isn't just coming from someone like a political person that doesn't like us and is spewing hate, but it's also coming from a business-making model. It's also coming from sort of the institutionalized racism that is created and still exists today. And so for us, sort of allowing our people to see the different dots and connect them has actually been really helpful for them to understand that it's not only their duty and responsibility to fight for their families, but also for their whole community. I will say within the raids that have happened in the past months, we've seen sort of different responses, right? We had a case of a woman in Fort Valley, which is sort of the middle of Georgia, who is part of our Comité de Defensa. So that's our popular committees that we have throughout Georgia. We have about 19 now. And these folks were on it. They understood that when raids come and when immigration shows up at your home, it doesn't matter if it feels like they're going to break down the door, you don't open the door. And so this woman was describing the terror that she was experiencing, but her constant reminding of, I can't open the door, and so she literally picked up her couch, put it against the door, and didn't open, and so immigration didn't take her, right? And so we've seen sort of those responses. We've seen the responses of people who unfortunately aren't as organized and aren't as aware of their rights. We've seen families being torn apart. We actually had a call from a family who's the mother of 2 children. The youngest was 4 years of age, was actually detained at Irwin, which is one of the detention centers. She was transferred from Irwin Detention Center back to her apartment just so that immigration could pick up her 2 kids. The smallest child was 4 years of age. And so when you think about sort of the travesty that's happening, and when we have, politicians talking about the human rights of children in Syria and other countries, but at the same time you're sort of propelling that type of terror for a 4-year-old, it's sort of hypocritical in a lot of sense. And so for us, it's important for a community to understand that the state is sort of set up in such a way that it is to profit off our work, it is to profit off our incarceration, and ultimately our deportations. And so how do we organize around those issues? It's been a multi-layer response. I guess that's the short answer of it, but yeah.
Could you explain, Eva, about the Georgia Not One More Coalition and what that is doing?
Yeah, sure. So part of the Georgia Not One More Deportation Coalition is an extension of the Georgia Not One More campaign that we've seen sort of in the past 2 years sort of pick up speed. Through that organizing and that political pressure, we've sort of push the immigration and also the agencies such as the Department of Homeland Security and the Obama administration to issue the defer action, right? And that was through a lot of organizing throughout the different states and just to kind of pressure Obama and this whole notion of creating change, right? And so part of the Georgia Not One More Deportation Coalition, it is to kind of continue to push the ending of any collaboration between immigration and the police departments. So what we do understand to be one of the major bleeding points for our community is sort of these agreements that are sometimes very secretive between the police and immigration, which basically share information, detain people. Sometimes there's a lot of over-detention issues, so people should be released, but they're not, just simply because the sheriff or the guard feels like they can't. And so it kind of muddies the lines of who has the authority to do what. And so part of the coalition is to educate the police departments, educate the sheriffs, educate the counties on how this sort of collaboration is unfortunately damaging any type of communication between the police department and community. So a lot of communities that have been victims of crimes are most likely to refuse to collaborate or even report any crime if they do know that immigration is working with that police department. And so part of that is sort of to educate, but also is to push any ending of collaboration. So we know that there's different programs that are going about that immigration is sort of pitching as, you can do more for your community, when in reality they are creating a level of hostility. And so the coalition is here to kind of stir some ruckus and kind of push that up.
So unfortunately, we've only got a couple minutes left for your interview. Could you tell our listeners about what's happening on Thursday morning at 10 o'clock?
Sure. So March 24th at 10 to 12, we're going to be having a rally. And this is a direct response of what's been happening with the rates, what's been happening with sort of the legislation, and what's been happening nationwide, which is this whole notion of the xenophobia and Islamophobia that's being created out there. So the rally is just basically a call out for people to come and show their support. I think that throughout the summer we're going to start seeing more events come up, and we're really excited about the prospect of what we're going to be pushing out this year, and so we invite people to come. It's going to be at the Liberty Plaza, which is apparently this new designated area for us to protest. That's behind the Capitol, and so we'll be there from 10 to 12, and people are more than invited to come and show their support.
Do you want to give real fast telephone numbers, Facebook pages, websites, etc.?
Sure. So you can contact us at GLAR, which the number is 770-457-5232. We're also on Facebook under GLAHR, and we're also on Twitter. We're still struggling to figure out Twitter because I'm long-winded and I can't be typing under 140 characters. But once again, the number is 770-457-5232.
I just want to say for listeners, they do have a hotline, and so all kinds of issues that immigrants of all nationalities face, GLAR is available for some assistance.
That's right. They can give us a call and we'll be happy to help them out.
Thank you so much, Eva,
Thank
for
you for
showing
having
Thank you,
me.
Eva.
Here today, being in the studio with your beautiful smile, and we really look forward to having you back again.
Of course. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, listeners. That was Eva Cardenas from GLAR, which stands for Georgia Latino Alliance for Human Rights. We're going to take another little break for another message, and then we'll be right back with our two guests who are going to talk about this challenge. It's more than a challenge. It's a state takeover of our public schools. Stay tuned.